In the name of the one and only, in the prison of perception, in the midst of darkened seas, our shadows still project a scribbly silhouette, an othered face of God. From refracted revelations, we carve niches and white spaces. We make places, we make people with identities galore. In heaped high stratifications, we can't see complementarities of colors, hues, and shades. Fine distinctions of that paintbrush held divine. We indulge in retrospection as we distance to disown a scant appearance, contemplating mirrored images, but the mirror doesn't flinch, nor does it blink, defies effacing the true image we disdain. We can't change, we break the mirror. Shattered crystals hold persistent self-reflections. Shadows trace our projections, recreating the created. We create even great gods in our image, then claim opposite as truth. Narcissistically, we worship these projections. We prostrate in adoration, return gestures in elation, spiraling circles of illusion, a circumference in search of a lost center. For too long, shadows have claimed us in their own distorted darkness, tracing self in its own paces from now here to know where, to know where. Ah, the virtues to be different, of indifference, to be one with every being. Leave the solace of seclusion, fly away to the far distance blue horizons, beneath freshly painted clouds, on the edge of great divide, to awareness in wholeness, where matter doesn't matter, and mind surely doesn't mind. In divine domain of splendor, in celestial beauty's glances remain still to be reflected in all beings once again. We drew your attention to the poem I just shared with you, and in it is the description of a very profound relationship between the human and the divine. However you may believe in a reality of the sense world or a revelation from the far beyond, it's a yearning in the human nature that there is an entity out there that is sought from within our essence, that it helps our compass, our whereabouts in the vastness of the universe. Without it, we feel lost. But interestingly enough, that entity from without which we are lost is also lost in our perception. What is it that we seek? We seek an illusion. And the illusion does not imply that it doesn't have a reality. But you may argue so, that its illusion is unreal because it's not measurable within the confines of our human perception and our human nature and our sense world environment. That is true. The other may not be so. So what is it that we seek that we know we cannot find? That in essence is our true self, to which divinity or divine principles or divine attributes are given, shared, and projected. Is it there? We are not the measure by which we can answer that question definitely. The mere fact that we may or may not be capable of perceiving it does not constitute the truth itself. The truth in reality is far beyond that, far beyond the reach of the human perception. So whether we can define the divine, whether we can identify the divine, whether we can identify with the divine, is no criteria for its existence or our non-existence, and vice versa. The reason I share the poem with you is that because in a way it talks about that very principle of the perception. And as the poem is named, in the prison of perception, we are nothing but in that prison. Let me go over a few of the lines with you so that we can share the details, and in the details we can find out, or at least make an attempt to find out where we stand. And here is the first verse, if I can find it. I'm struggling with the modern technology here to bring it up. In the prison of perception, the very title indicates that perception, as much as it is an expansive indulgence, an attempt into the vastness of beingness, it is also has these constraints that limits us, that holds us back because of the limitations of its reach. So in the midst of darkened seas, our shadows still project a scribbly silhouette, an othered face of God. The darkened seas. Metaphorically could refer to the seas that we know, the vast oceans. And yes, their bottoms are dark, pitch dark. But you could also interpret that as the vastness of the universe, which is a sea in its own right. And that too is dark, illuminated here and there by sparkles of sun or other solar or sun-like bodies. And when we are in those darkened seas, the word darkened implies that there has to be a light somewhere, whose absence implies that this particular space is darkened. And we also need that dark space in order to contrast it with a light. And when light and darkness come together, it creates a silhouette. And a silhouette is both an image and it is not. It's an image because, at least from a profile, from a side view, it may have certain features. But the features are not recognizable or identifiable other than in generalities. And it's referred to as scribbly because it is vague. That is the nature of a silhouette. And that face is referred to as an othered face of God. The word other is used as a verb, using poetic license, of course. There is a face of God, but how do we know how it looks, or what it is, or what are its features? We have no choice but to perceive it, and the common human perception is that where we perceive things with which we identify more than anything else. That's why gods are perceived in the cultural confines of different societies. An Asian god looks Asian, a European god looks European. It doesn't matter where they have originated. That Buddha, Siddhartha Buddha, was not Japanese, but that's how he looks like in Japan. And Jesus was not Swedish, but that's how he is perceived when the Swedes create a perception of Jesus as either God or Son of God, depending on their belief system. And so his Palestinian origin is not relevant here because we talk about perception. So that is what the poem talks about, an othered face of God. And so this other is both a projection to go from within to the outside. And it could also be the shadow, because it says that our shadows still project those images. The poem goes on into the next stanza. From refracted revelations, we carve niches and white spaces we make places, we make people with identities galore. Refracted revelation. Intentionally, the word implies that there is a fraction or refraction or a breaking in the inconsistency of the perceptions from whence the revelations come. And it's there we carve niches which are cultural, as I explained in the previous two cases of Buddha and Jesus. And we carve niches and wide spaces. So the width of the space or the expanse of the space is the element of universality within a perceptive religious belief system. And the niches are that with the acknowledgement of its expanse, our ego gets into action and defines and confines a limited space with which we can personally identify. In heaped high stratifications, we can't see complementarities of colors, hues, and shades, fine distinctions of that paintbrush held divine. The paintbrush held divine is the hand of God, however you want to perceive it, religiously, poetically, mystically, philosophically, or otherwise. So the divine hand has painted us in different hues and colors and shades. These pigments of our skins that are only skin deep are often viewed as being so essential to our beingness that they are the basis of our starkest discriminations in the human family. And they provide and create the complementarities that if you had a canvas, the only reason you can see a painting on a canvas is the diversity of colors blending into one another, separating from one another. In other words, if all the colors and shades of a painting on a canvas were one and the same, you won't see a painting. If you paint a canvas all white, it's just a white canvas, it's not a painting. And for that matter, if you painted it all black, it won't be any different. So while we admire the diversity, the differences, the contrast, and the complementarities of the shades of paint on a canvas, which in most cases is also a reflection of how we see the nature outside. When we go to a garden and we admire flowers and plants and trees and meadows and greeneries and colorful flowers, we admire them because they complement one another. It's their complementarity. Yes, we humans have a strange nature. While we admire the diversity of colors in a garden, we still want our front lawn to be uniformly green, the same. If we find a small patch of discolored or dying grass, we replace it. So the human nature is trying to make the difference the same, whereas nature is trying to make the same different, and that's the difference. And it's not that we just want all the grass in our lawn to be uniformly the same height, the same shade, the same color, the same freshness, etc. We often extend that to our human environment too. One of the reasons we discriminate against other human beings is that we try to look for differences, and we devalue the difference. So if our skin color is so-called white, and there is no such a thing unless we are talking about marble statues, but just for the sake of argument, if our skin color is white, then white must be good because it's our skin color, and every other color has to be devalued, looked down upon, discriminated against, or othered, as the poem is talking about. And similarly, whatever our anthropological makeup of the features of our face are, if we all have long noses, then those with short noses are bad. If we all have dark hair, and those with light hair will be bad, and so on. And so therefore, we use ourselves as a standard by which everything else has to be measured. And when I say ourselves, we often refer to ourselves as the visible self that we claim to have, not the content of our brain, as Martin Luther King Jr. would say, not the essence of our being, not the knowledge that we may inherently have that might distinguish us from others. No other sign of distinction that is of essence, that is of value, that would give us the right to claim a relative superiority to other beings. Not that, only the appearance. And look around the world. That's where all the problems stem from. Whether it's in the political realm, in the cultural, in the social, in the societal, in the regional conflicts. Even when we have additional issues such as religious identities, ideological differences, and so on. We look for difference, but the pivotal criteria is still the appearance of an individual, either in the individual sense or in the collective sense, that is used as a measure of virtue. And otherness is defined from that point. This is what creates the stratifications, in heaped high stratifications. The upper class, the lower class, and the many classes and castes and other distinctions that we make in society now, and ones that we have been making in the course of human history. That stratification is where we create them, we perceive them, and the first thing we do is to deny excuse me, their complementarities. Going back to the canvas, that the mere existence of one particular hue or shade of a color gives meaning to any other hue or shade of a color that is not like it. So that it's because of black that we can identify the white and vice versa. And as I said earlier, the nature of things, if we for a moment equate nature with God, the hand of God, the hand of nature, the hand of God diversifies. The hand of human creates uniformity because it's thinking in form, not in essence. And we are stuck with that form. And because of that uniformity, we want to make everyone else look like us. We either accept them if they are like us, and if they are not like us, we would like them to be or become like us as much as possible. In other words, cultural assimilation, political assimilation, adherence to the principles of a polity, of governance, of a society. In all of these, we create uniformities because we cannot understand the complementarities. Yes, you may argue that, of course, we need that uniformity because we have to strive for equality. Again, to philosophize the argument, there is no such a thing as equality in the absolute sense of the word. If God is the creator, then a true creator, regardless of whether you believe in it or not, a true creator would have to create everything in its own right, distinctively, distinguishable, different and differentiated. Why so? Because if a distinction disappears between, say, two created entities, only the first one is created, the second one is copied. And God, as we define it, does not make copies, because if God makes copies, God is not creating that second entity. And if God is not creating, God cannot be a creator. And so back to the first argument, nature is in distinction. The nature of nature is distinction and differentiation. And that distinction and differentiation is complementarity of one and the other, not a means of discrimination. We indulge in retrospection as we distance to disown askance appearance, contemplating mirrored images. But the mirror doesn't flinch, nor does it blink. Defies effacing the true image we disdain. We can't change. We break the mirror. Shattered crystals hold persistent self-reflections. The indulgence in retrospection is traveling through a dimension of time. Again, the time is defined from where we stand. We are ego-centered in that sense too. So we distance ourselves from anything that is not like us, askance appearance. Then we contemplate the mirror images. The mirrored image is our image. And once we look into it and we see its imperfections, and the imperfections imply that a complementarity had been denied. Otherwise, there is no imperfection. Nature creates things perfectly because they reflect and project the perfection of its maker, the nature, the divine, the God. Now, only when we measure it through a human perception, and depending on who we are, where we stand, what do we want to measure against? And that's how we create, or we rather add, a cultural dimension to the norm, to the acceptance. What is beautiful may naturally be defined as that which you can appreciate the way it is in nature. But what is defined as beautiful culturally is something else. That's where certain norms and standards, assimilations and uniformities, commonalities, and stereotypes are elevated to a level of acceptance, and by contrast, certain other ones are devalued and rejected and disowned. And so therefore, during any period of human history, the dominant culture defines what is beautiful. We see by the hundreds and by the millions people going through the knife of a plastic surgeon to recreate themselves for cultural acceptability. Because it's that cultural acceptability that defines that which is perceived to be normal or beautiful. But then that is what the poem is talking about, is that when we look in the mirror for ourselves, we will see our own beauty. It's only when we try to match it with what a particular culture perceives to be the norm, and when that norm is different from how we look, or when our looks, for lack of a better term, deviates from the culturally accepted norm, it's when we are ready to break the mirror. So, because we want that changed. In the past, often we broke the mirror literally. The way we break mirrors today is dialing the number for a plastic surgeon. I hope people won't take this personally. To me, everything is beautiful. I have the eye to perceive beauty in everything human, nature, plants, vegetations, animals. If you train your eye, which shouldn't be that difficult, you will see there is a lot more beauty. But you will have to throw away the cultural filter. That is the askance appearance. That if you see it through the lens of cultural relativism, then you don't see beauty in everything, because you're looking for a stereotypically defined beauty, whether it's in the human face or it's in the hues and shades of other colors that might be in what we wear, where we sit, how we build our homes, etc. So these shattered crystals hold persistent self-reflections. We wanted to break the mirror, but in essence we broke ourselves. We are shattered. We have lost our humanity because the filtering, the cultural filtering, was so powerful and so strong that we had to assimilate, not just in looks, but also in perceptions and in values, in humanity, and in every other sense of the word. Shadows trace our projection, recreating the created. We create even great gods in our image, then claim opposite as truth. We talked about the light and the darkness and the depth of the dark seas, the first stanza. Remember the silhouette. Yes, the silhouette might be the shadow projected from our physique upon a flat surface. But we also have a shadow that's within us. That is the shadow that is created by an illumination of gnosis, of spirituality, of our true essence, of our soul and spirit, not necessarily in the religious sense. But if we go to the core of the core of the core of our being, we will see light. And the impurities that block that light also project a shadow image. Those are our inefficiencies, our shortcomings. Not the kind you will have to go to a plastic surgeon for, but one you would have to contemplate within. But as we do that, these shadows trace our projection, recreating the created. That which is created is by nature. That which is being recreated is through our human projections that operate within the confines of a particular cultural value system. We create even great gods in our image, then claim opposite as truth. So once we have attained mastery in this art of creating and recreating through the projections, we create everything. Why not create gods? Yes, we are not talking about a god from a religious perspective. So don't blame me for blasphemy. But if it makes you feel good, go ahead. But we do have a projected God, a perceived God, not the God of the scriptures, not necessarily, and not necessarily the God, the divine totality of the cosmic reality, which is how I would define God. I'm not talking about the God that is, but the God that has become a part of our individual human perceptions. In principle, yes, God is one, or it ought to be one. But in terms of human perceptions, it's impossible for God to be one. We are not arguing polytheistic concepts or multiplicities of the divine. Rather, the multiplicities of the projections of the divine, which we humans create and recreate within our cultural confines. And yes, it is that created perception of the divine within us which in many cases makes us the only true believer, and everyone else is a disbeliever or unbeliever because their perceptions are different, and they have to be. So if this God is so egotistically or egoistically self-centered, then it is we humans, we human individuals, who consider ourselves the center of that universe of perceptions. And therefore, the gods we create spin around us. We are the center of the universe, not God. And it is this self-centeredness that we in the poem refer to as the narcissistically, we worship these projections, the element of narcissism. There is again the self-centeredness in this. And let's take a break. We'll come back to continue this discussion from the point of view of a self-centered human perception as to what the divine ought to be. We'll be back after this break.